In my position, I help teachers to understand and better support their students who've been diagnosed with a fetal alcohol spectrum disorder, or FASD. Since I don't teach the traditional subject areas at this time, I needed to find a way to integrate raising moral awareness with learning about FASD. As my final project, I looked for a way to adapt the assignment to be a valuable activity that I could use with educators that I'm working with. I believe that developing critical thinking is the link that I was looking for. Critical thinking requires thinking about thinking. We need to take time to determine accurate information and relate it to our morals and values. Then we have to make a conscious effort to internalize our knowledge and decisions and apply them to daily life. It is our responsibility as educators to do this and to try to teach this to our students. If a basic foundation of moral awareness is making sure you are informed, it's then directly related to critical thinking. Good critical thinking is the foundation of science. As well, a democracy requires citizens who can think critically about social issues in order to overcome bias and prejudice. As Hohner writes, knowing about moral values means understanding how to apply it in various situations. The first step to being able to have integrity and to stand up for what you know is right is having confidence that you have examined an issue from all sides and have good reasons for your beliefs. So good, in fact, that you can withstand peer pressure to change your decisions. One of the basic principles of critical thinking involves looking at an issue from various viewpoints before drawing conclusions. This is directly related to perspective taking. According to Hohner, moral reasoning involves understanding what it means to be moral and why we should be moral. In order to do this, we use critical thinking. Critical thinking is thinking about our thinking, something that we must do in order to justify and reflect on our values and decisions. Hohner talks about the importance of being able to think one's way through a moral problem, to maximize the good consequences and be faithful to the important values at stake. Critical thinking is an important skill for evaluating new ideas, selecting the best ones, and modifying them if necessary. The final point that Hohner makes related to moral knowing is developing self-knowledge. A major piece of critical thinking involves thinking and reflecting on our thinking and behaviors, which is critical to developing self-knowledge. Here's the plan that I devised. First, I wanted to make sure that we're all starting from a level playing field as far as our understanding of what critical thinking means. That means starting out looking at critical thinking in a more general sense, then considering how it applies to education, and then narrowing it down to resource evaluation, which dovetails with the assignment. As well, I've included some additional videos and opportunities for discussion. So beginning with the question of what is critical thinking, this may include looking at how do we define critical thinking. Exploring the etymology of the words can be a great starting point for understanding the concept. Another startup activity could be having students each find a definition for critical thinking, and then building a discussion about the merits of the different opinions. An extension could be for small groups to find common threads in their definitions and report back to the group. In this YouTube video, Gary Megan uses this definition by Dr. Richard Paul and takes it apart, looking at what critical thinking involves and just how important it is. Cartoons can also be a great discussion starter. In order to get a depth of understanding, it is important to allow time for students to exchange ideas and to encourage them to provide evidence to back up their ideas. Critical thinking is not a matter of accumulating information. A person with a good memory and who knows a lot of facts is not necessarily good at critical thinking. A critical thinker is able to deduce consequences from what he knows, something that the man in this picture may not be thinking about too clearly. Also, a critical thinker knows how to make use of the information to solve problems and to seek relevant sources of information to inform himself. But what about in education? Once a basic understanding of what critical thinking is has been established, it's important for teachers to explore why this skill is important to education. depending upon time, this is another great opportunity for small group discussion and sharing. Groups can then report out to the large group on why they think critical thinking is important in education. If additional time is available, there's another resource that can be used to deepen and solidify an understanding of the importance of developing and honing critical thinking skills. This YouTube link has classic footage from the Ash Conformity Study. This version is presented by Dr. Philip Zimbardo. The experiment begins with students identifying which line on a picture is not the same length as other lines. Students must call their answers out loud. Now all of the participants have been planted with pre-arranged instructions, with the exception of the one test subject. At first, everyone answers honestly, but as the test progresses, the planted students have been told to give the wrong answer. The majority of test participants, when faced with giving a different answer than everyone else, give in to group conformity. Although they disagreed, they publicly gave the same answer as the group. The video looks somewhat dated as the study was done in the 1950s. However, it is still a very powerful demonstration on the power that the group has to pressure people into conformity. So to improve our own critical thinking as educators is one piece, but it's also extremely important to try to teach critical thinking to our students. In order to help us with this, it can be beneficial to use a framework. One framework was written by Robert Vallet in 1986 for junior and high school students to help them learn to cope more effectively with their problems. It was intended as a guide for helping adolescents explore and solve problems through constructive critical thinking. It proposes 10 steps in the process of constructive critical thinking, beginning with what is the purpose, collecting the data, identifying the issues, barriers, concerns, and determining what questions need answers. It then takes you through the process of considering the pros and cons, organizing a plan of action, and then practicing or rehearsing the actions. It finishes up reflecting on how things went and determining how to move forward from there. Since the best way for teachers to learn to use a framework like this is through practice, I planned an activity at this point. Here's a sample of the kind of topic that educators can use in small groups to practice the constructive critical thinking framework. You'll notice right away that this type of question is very open-ended and will allow students freedom to bring forward their thoughts and evidence, as well as have an opportunity to see the point of view of others. In addition to a good basic understanding of how and why we need to think critically and learning a framework for constructive critical thinking, it is important that teachers learn how to carefully choose their resources. One thing that has become obvious to me over the years is that not all resources are created equal, and for that reason, it's really important that teachers be able to critically evaluate the resources that they use so that every lesson they create makes the best use of their valuable time. When teachers begin planning a lesson, they're typically confronted with an abundance of resources. With so much information out there, the question becomes, how do you decide what to use? Not everything you find, in particular resources on the internet, reflect your needs or standards. It is important that teachers are able to think critically and judge what is relevant and appropriate for their purpose, in this case related to FASD. I've adapted the following information and activities from the University of Leeds Skills Library. Here is one possible set of resource evaluation criteria that could be used to decide on the value of a resource: authority, objectivity, timeliness, supporting evidence, and relevance. Authority involves knowing who has produced the information and how they have produced it. As well, understanding their motivation for doing so can help you make judgments about its reliability. Being able to identify the author, the sponsoring body or source of your information, is also important. If you don't know where the information has come from, how can you trust it? So when you're looking at the objectivity of a resource, consider the purpose of the information. Who is the target audience? Is the author's perspective clearly stated? Is there advertising or marketing attached to the resource? The date when information was produced or published can be an important aspect of quality. Of course, that doesn't mean you should throw the baby out with the bathwater. It's not as simple as saying good information has to be up to date. A very old newspaper, for example, could be exactly what you need when you're making historical inquiries. So evaluating whether or not the information meets your timeliness requirements depends entirely on the resource and what you're using it for. There are many factors to consider when making a decision about the quality of the information that you find. Be sure to consider what evidence the author has provided. Academic work is usually based on evidence, whether it's from personal research or published sources of information. It is the evidence that supports the information that the author is putting forward in their work. Finally, you should consider relevance. You'll want to consider things like the level, geographic location, and emphasis. Just because it's good information does not necessarily mean it's a good fit for your needs. There's a lot to think about when deciding what information to use to support your work. One tool that can help is an evaluation checklist. I've adapted this one from the Leeds University. You can use this type of tool to evaluate any type of information source. The final assignments are a way of learning more about FASD while integrating the skills of critical thinking. First, students are asked to reflect upon the information about critical thinking and to write a journal entry about how this information may impact their current work situation. Next, students are asked to search for a resource about FASD that they think would be valuable to share with their colleagues. They will need to create a critical review of the resource and then present it to the group. Through integrating critical thinking skills throughout the curriculum, a solid foundation for moral awareness can be built.